Vest movement has been going on for the past 9 weeks at this point. It has been essentially every weekend. They've been over and over and over again all throughout France. The last week brought out 84,000 people to the marches, to the protests. Macron, his government has gotten more and more desperate to quell this. And to be honest, this has gotten somewhat violent. Cops and a small, very small percentage of the protesters. Now, the public, 60 to 70% of the public, agrees with these protests. The fact that you have such numbers agreeing with the protests as opposed to Macron, who has like a low 30% approval rating, you can see this. You can see this dichotomy between those two things. And you can get this idea of there's marches with a public that is full well behind these protests, which gets across that there's something systemic, there's something wrong that the public itself is responding to. It is not just a few people, random apples, bobbing about in a particular way. It is it's not fully organized yet, but this is representative of France. You essentially have left, right, and center come out. These are not political parties that are doing this. They're trying to skew any notion of a political party essentially owning them. Ultimately, they are France, and they are pissed off. Macron has thrown things overboard, essentially trying to quell these protests. But in addition to him throwing things overboard, you have the police that have gotten far more aggressive, far more violent in its ways of trying to deal with the protests, being from water cannons, grenades. Peaceful protesters sprayed with water cannons and hit with grenades. In addition to something else that they've been using that is, in this case, has had dramatic consequences, at the very least for one person, and apparently there are other injuries that have been reported. Father of 3, and to call him a protester or yellow vest sometimes misses the point that it's a human being. It's somebody who's dragged himself out, who would rather been watching football or something, but has dragged himself out into the street in order to get across his dissatisfaction with the current order of things. Cater to the rich while simultaneously putting the burden on the poor, especially from the standpoint of the environmental thing, which was the start of all this. Father of 3, what is the gentleman's name? Oliver Bezade is the gentleman that's laying behind. Firefighter, volunteer firefighter, father of 3, shot in the back of the head by cops. The wife described it as if they were at a rabbit shoot, if they were shooting rabbits, in the way that they were essentially attacking peaceful protesters. Now, the cops make the argument that somebody was trying to break, or a gang of them were trying to break into an Apple store. Now, whether they were trying to break into an Apple store or not, even if they were, and not saying this person was, because it doesn't sound like this person was, but even if they were trying to break into an Apple store, is shooting them in the back of the head with a flashball really the way to deal with that? Take a look at this, just so you can see what a flashball is. I looked this up because I was curious about what this looked like. Apparently, they've been using these weapons and been attacking yellow vest protesters with these weapons. Here's an example of what these guns are, and here's an example of this cop pointing it at a journalist. He's pointing that flashball gun directly at the guy. Pointing it right at him. Here is another example of what these things look like. I hope you saw that. That's brutal. That's what they're aiming at other human beings. Take a look at the pictures that came from this. Shot in the head. Oliver Bezade, father of 3 in his 30s, was shot in the back of the head in Bordeaux on Saturday. This is him. This is the iconic picture that was taken of this. There's a video. I'm not going to show the video, and I'm not even going to take long on this video. I just kind of want to point out some of the things that these guys are going through in order to get social change. This is somewhat of a cost. There's no magical door. This is somewhat of a cost that people are willing to bear in order to get changes within their society. That's how fed up they are. That's at the level to which they are trying to get it done. The French government itself, in order to suppress this, has turned violent. It's turned violent. You can understand this from somewhat of an incentive standpoint. You have a society that essentially has sprung up in a certain degree of assertiveness, and you have a police organization that is in its basis, in its DNA, is not necessarily to protect the citizenry, but to protect order, to maintain order. And what is taking place in France is disorder, which is somewhat of a discrediting of their ability to maintain order within France. They're incentivized to come up with this kind of muscular approach in order to quell this. But a muscular approach to quell this is not the issue. The issue is social change. Social change. These people are willing to pay a cost for that social change. This cost is in their time, their sweat, their bodies, and in this case, it's their blood. I want to go to his wife. Here's other images of what took place. The police are instructed to shoot well below the head, but there have been numerous incidents of them failing to do so. Well, you saw the other video where the guy was pointing the gun at the guy's head. It didn't seem like he was shooting below. Not saying this is indicative of all police, but clearly there have been some that have been willing to do this, in which case a gentleman is in a coma. They shot us like rabbits, said Mrs. Bezade, who confirmed that her husband was induced coma. The local police, as the shots were fired, and a uniformed officer can be seen throwing a stun grenade towards them. So not only did they shoot him in the head, they started throwing stun grenades towards him. Like I said, the police said that they were trying to get into an Apple store. Even if they were, so what? Would you say for the moment this wasn't a flashball gun? Say this was a regular gun. Would you be able to shoot somebody in the head if they were trying to get into an Apple store? That's pretty vicious in order to protect private property. That's pretty fucked up. Can you shoot them in the leg in order to stop them from breaking into the Apple store? I'm getting to the point that can you injure and maim a human being in almost fatal way in order to stop them from assaulting or taking somebody else's private property? I think that's a fair point. Now, if that answer is no, meaning you can't shoot Mr. Bezade in the back of the head because you think he's trying to break into an Apple store, then what's the difference? If this gun has lethal force or can lethally kill someone if injured or hit in the back of the head, then what is the difference between shooting him in the back of the head with a regular gun that has lethal force versus shooting him in a flashball that has lethal force? For the most part, whatever that gun is being used, if that gun is being used at somebody's head, it has to be considered lethal force, just like any other weapon that can kill. Do you flout this? Meaning, do you ignore this and just say, hey, you got to crack some meds? Or are there consequences for essentially almost using lethal force or acting in ways that can be considered use of lethal force? I suspect there will be no consequences for this. This will be considered you have to crack some eggs. Fact of the matter is, though, these protests aren't going anywhere. Whether it's going to be in week 9, week 10, and so on, these guys are going to stay there, and they should stay there. They're doing God's work until they get what they want in regards to political changes. Macron is trying to wait them out. He's trying to essentially deflate these protests all the way out to March, and because he knows that at some point people get tired and they can't necessarily keep up that level of energy, in which case they try to bleed away the support by stretching out the amount of time as opposed to the action that are needed to take place almost in the immediacy of the moment. I just wanted to flag this. These are the things that people are willing to give in order to change society. It's not that it's pretty, it's not that it's great. There is no magical door to walk through. This is part consequence. They should stay the course. But fact of the matter is, there should be consequences for this. I mean, look, they're out there peacefully protesting, and the cops have essentially turned into this kind of military force trying to push these guys back. They put out 80,000 people, police, all throughout the country in order to blunt the protesters that were going to be out there. The cops were going to do, again, a show of force in this kind of muscular approach. They're trying to put down what they consider to be spreading of disorder through these through this riots, or through these, it's not even riots, it's protests. They only arrested 200 and something people out of 84,000 people that were out there. That gets you this clear idea that these were peaceful protests. It's the cops that were being violent in these situations. So I'm going to end this here. I'm not going to keep this one long, but if you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the Patreon. Thanks all.